Ryan's lips curved slightly, not into a smile, but something between sadness and truth. "When you've seen your world burn," he said quietly, "surviving is glory." The room went silent again. Even the air seemed still. One of the Valkar generals grunted, breaking the quiet. "Empty words. Humans always speak of pain as if it gives them strength, but your kind hides behind machines and walls. You are not warriors." Ryan turned his head slowly toward the voice. "And yet," he said calmly, "we're still here." The general growled, but Kareth raised her hand again, silencing him. She watched the human closely now. Something about his voice, his presence, didn't fit the image she had built in her mind. He didn't speak like a coward or a fool. There was a strange stillness around him, a kind of quiet fire that she could not name. "Human," Kareth said, her tone softer but still commanding. "What wars have you fought that make you speak like this?" Ryan's eyes flickered with memory. For a moment, he wasn't in the hall anymore. He was back on Mars, the red battlefield, the smell of blood and burnt iron, the screams in his headset. He could still hear them. He looked back at her and said, "Wars that never should have been fought. Wars that took everything." The Valkyr listened. None of them laughed this time. There was something in his words, something heavy that touched even their hardened hearts. Kareth crossed her arms. "And yet you came here. You came to prove yourself before our queen. Why?" Ryan hesitated for a second, then answered, "Because I made a promise to keep fighting until there's nothing left to protect." The simplicity of his answer silenced even the proudest of them. He didn't speak of conquest, glory, or revenge. He spoke of duty, something pure and human. Kareth studied him again. For a brief moment her eyes softened, but pride was a hard chain to break. She straightened her back and said, "Then show us the proof of that promise. Show us what your fragile armor hides." Ryan looked down at his armor, dull, old, scratched. He ran his hand over a burn mark on the chest plate. Beneath that mark, under the metal, he still carried the pain of his past. He nodded slowly. "All right," he said. "You asked for it." He reached for the clamps on his shoulder. The sound of metal unlocking echoed through the quiet hall. The first piece of armor, his shoulder plate, fell to the ground with a heavy clang. Then another, and another. The Valkar watched in complete silence as he began to remove each piece of armor. Beneath it was a plain, torn undersuit, black and faded. His movements were slow, almost ceremonial. It wasn't just armor he was removing, it was memory, it was pain. It was the shell that had kept him alive for too long. When his chest plate came off, a collective gasp filled the air. His body was covered in scars, old burns, cuts, and deep surgical marks. One of his ribs had been replaced with metal. Part of his arm was synthetic. There were old tattoos near his collarbone. Names. Names of the fallen. Kareth felt her chest tighten. She didn't expect this. The laughter that once filled the hall was now gone, replaced by something else, something heavy and quiet. Ryan stood still, bare from the waist up, the light of the torches casting shadows across his skin. "You wanted to see strength," he said softly. "Well, this is what it looks like." Kareth's golden eyes didn't move. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came. The Valkar warriors who had mocked him only minutes ago now stood silent, their gazes lowered. Ryan looked around, meeting their eyes one by one. "You see armor as power," he said quietly. "We see it as survival. You wear yours to show glory. I wear mine to hide what it cost me to keep breathing." His words sank deep into every heart in the hall. Kareth finally spoke, her voice lower now. "You speak as if pain is your teacher." Ryan looked up at her. "Pain is the only teacher that never lies." No one laughed. No one mocked. The grand hall, once filled with noise and pride, now stood silent as the human stood bare before them, small in size, yet towering in spirit. And as the torches flickered softly around him, even the proud Commander Kareth could not look away. She had called his armor a joke, but what she saw beneath it was no joke at all. It was truth, the truth of what it meant to be human. For a long moment, no one moved. The sound of Ryan's last armor plate hitting the cold marble floor echoed through the vast grand hall like a heartbeat. The laughter that had once filled the room had died completely. Now there was only silence, heavy, uneasy, and full of something the Valkar rarely felt, respect mixed with shame. Ryan stood there, his breath calm and steady, his bare skin marked by the stories of 100 battles. The torchlight painted shadows over the scars that crossed his chest, his shoulders, and his back. Some were clean and straight, others rough and burned, melted into the flesh. A metal frame ran along his ribs, and his right arm gleamed faintly under the light, a crude prosthetic of human design. It wasn't sleek or perfect like the machines of the Valkar. It was ugly, functional, human. He did not flinch under their gaze. He did not hide his scars. He simply stood there, quiet and still, as if daring them to look away. Kareth's golden eyes widened slightly. The arrogance she wore so easily faltered for the first time. She had seen many warriors in her life, some with broken horns, others with claw marks or burns, but this was different. These weren't the scars of glory. These were the marks of endurance, of someone who had refused to die when the universe wanted him gone. Ryan looked up at her, his voice calm but heavy. "You called my armor a joke," he said softly, "but this is what it's been protecting." His words echoed through the hall, bouncing off the pillars and reaching every corner. The Valkar warriors, once so proud and loud, now stood frozen, their eyes locked on the small, scarred human who faced them with nothing but his bare body and steady gaze. Kareth took a slow breath, her voice lower now. "You have survived much." Ryan gave a faint nod. "More than I should have." She stepped closer, her armor shining like a star next to his dull skin. She towered over him, but for the first time it didn't feel like she was the stronger one. "Tell me," she said quietly, "what made those scars?" Ryan's eyes softened, his gaze drifting somewhere far away. "War," he said. "And the things that come after." The hall remained silent. He could have said more, but those few words carried the weight of 1,000 untold stories. Every scar on his skin was a line in that story, a story written in blood, pain, and survival. He looked down at his metal arm and flexed it slowly. The joints creaked softly. "This," he said, raising it slightly, "was taken by plasma fire on Mars. My team and I were the last ones left defending the evacuation line. The air was burning, the sky was red, and I remember the heat melting the rocks beneath our feet. I dragged 2 of my men out before the ship left. I lost this arm before the last one got aboard." Kareth blinked slowly. "And you lived?" Ryan gave a small shrug. "Barely, but living's something humans are stubborn about." A faint ripple of whispers spread through the hall. The Valkar warriors exchanged glances, their faces unreadable. They had always thought of humans as soft, weak, emotional, easy to break. But what stood before them now didn't look weak at all. It looked unbreakable. Ryan's hand brushed against one of the deep scars on his chest. "This one," he continued quietly, "wasn't from an enemy. It was from a friend who died in my arms. He asked me to end it before the infection reached his heart. I did what I had to." His voice cracked slightly, and for a brief second the pain behind his calm eyes showed. The hall stayed utterly silent. No one dared to interrupt him. Kareth's voice softened. "You carry the dead with you?" Ryan nodded once. "Always, that's what we humans do. We remember them. It's how we keep them alive." The torchlight flickered gently, casting long shadows across his body. Each scar seemed to tell its own story, each mark a memory of something he'd survived, something he'd lost. One of the younger Valkar warriors stepped forward, his voice uncertain. "Why still fight then? If all it brings is pain?" Ryan turned his head toward him. His eyes, though tired, shone with quiet fire. "Because if we stop fighting, then their deaths mean nothing. And I can't let that happen." Those simple words struck deep. The Valkar, who lived for glory and power, suddenly realized that this small human fought not for pride, not for fame, but for love, for memory, for something far greater than themselves. Kareth took another step closer, studying him as if seeing him for the first time. "You could have stayed home. You could have left war behind. Why come here to stand before us?" Ryan met her gaze unblinking. "Because peace doesn't come by standing still. Someone always has to take the step forward. Someone has to remind others what courage really looks like." There was a strange silence after that, one that didn't feel uncomfortable but heavy with realization. Every Valkar in that hall, every proud warrior covered in shining armor, felt something they hadn't expected to feel toward a human: admiration. Ryan looked around at them all. "You wear armor to show strength," he said softly. "But strength isn't about how much metal you wear. It's about how much pain you can carry and still stand up. The words were quiet, but they struck like thunder. A few Valkar lowered their heads unconsciously, ashamed of their earlier laughter. Kareth's jaw tightened, her pride stung, yet her heart stirred with something she couldn't deny. You speak like a philosopher, she said finally. Ryan smiled faintly. No. Just a soldier who's tired of seeing graves. Kareth looked away briefly, her gaze falling on his discarded armor lying in pieces on the floor. What once looked pathetic now seemed like sacred relics, proof of a warrior who had seen things even she couldn't imagine. She knelt slightly, her massive hand brushing the rough edge of one piece. It was scratched and burned, yet still solid. Still there, just like the man it protected. When she looked back at him, there was no mockery left in her eyes, only a deep, growing respect. You said this armor protects what's left of you, she said slowly. Now I see. It has done its duty well. Ryan nodded quietly. It's not much to look at, but it's kept me alive longer than I deserve. Kareth stood tall again, but her tone had changed completely. It was no longer commanding, it was sincere. Human, she said. Your scars speak louder than any boast. Perhaps we were the ones wearing jokes, not you. Ryan didn't reply. He simply met her gaze, his expression unreadable. Then he bent down, picked up his helmet, and placed it under his arm. For a long time, no one spoke. Even the torches seemed to burn more softly, as if the hall itself was bowing to the quiet strength that had just revealed itself. Finally, Kareth turned to her soldiers. Let it be known, she said, her voice ringing through the hall, that the smallest among us has shown the greatest courage. And with that, the Valkar warriors, those mighty giants who had mocked him moments ago, lowered their heads in silence, not because they were ordered to, but because they wanted to. Ryan stood still, his scars glowing faintly in the torchlight, his face calm. In that moment, he didn't look small at all. He looked infinite. And though he said nothing more, the message was clear in his quiet presence. True strength doesn't shine, it endures. The grand hall of the Valkar Empire stood still as a tomb. The proud warriors, once full of laughter and mockery, now stood frozen in silence. The air felt heavy, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. Torches flickered softly, their flames dancing against the stone pillars, reflecting off the broken pieces of Ryan's armor scattered across the floor. No one dared to move. No one dared to speak. The human stood in the center of it all, bare, scarred, silent. His breath came slow and steady. His gray eyes were calm but deep, holding something that none of the aliens could quite name. It wasn't arrogance or defiance. It was something else, something quieter, older, and infinitely stronger. Commander Kareth stared at him, her golden eyes locked on his face. Just minutes ago, she had laughed at him. She had called his armor a joke, had looked down on him as something lesser. But now, standing before this fragile creature of flesh and scars, she felt something strange in her chest. Shame, respect, maybe both. Ryan broke the silence first. His voice was soft, almost tired, but it carried through the hall like a distant echo. You all wear your armor like a crown, he said. You polish it, carve your victories into it. But armor isn't supposed to be pretty. It's supposed to protect what's left when everything else is gone. No one responded. They just listened. His words, simple as they were, carried a truth that cut deeper than any blade. Kareth finally found her voice. You speak of survival as though it is honor, but we are warriors, human. We live for glory. Ryan looked up at her, his gaze steady. Then maybe that's the difference between us, he said quietly. You fight to be remembered. We fight because we can't afford to forget. The words hit her harder than any weapon. Around them, several Valkar warriors shifted uneasily. Their tails twitched, their claws scraped the marble floor. They had fought countless battles for glory, yes, but how many of them had fought for survival? For love? For something greater than their own name? Ryan took a slow step forward. His bare feet touched the cold marble with soft, steady sounds. You think I'm weak because I bleed easily, he continued. But bleeding doesn't mean you've lost. It means you're still fighting. Kareth's mouth opened, but no words came out. There was nothing to say. Every warrior in that room could see the truth written across his body. The burn marks, the old cuts, the metallic joints, the lines of pain carved deep into his flesh. This man had already lived through what most of them would never survive. Ryan looked around the hall, his gaze sweeping over the rows of silent Valkar. I've seen worlds burn, he said softly. I've seen skies fall apart. I've buried more friends than I can count. I've watched hope die and still picked up my weapon because someone had to. His voice grew quiet, almost breaking. You call it weakness to keep going after everything is gone. But that's what makes us human. We don't stop. We don't surrender. We stand up again and again because if we don't, no one else will. A faint sound escaped Kareth's throat. It wasn't laughter this time, it was a sharp breath, a sound caught between disbelief and admiration. She looked at the human, this small, scarred being, and for the first time in her long life, she saw something she couldn't explain. Not power, not perfection, but something far beyond both. He reminded her of a dying star, broken, fading, yet still burning brighter than anything else around it. Ryan's eyes drifted downward for a moment. He seemed to lose himself in memory. The faces of his fallen comrades flashed through his mind, the ones who had stood beside him on the red sands of Mars, the ones who never made it home. For a moment his hands trembled. Then he whispered, I wear these scars so I never forget who I failed to save. A heavy silence followed. Even the crackle of the torches seemed quieter now. The warriors of the Valkar, creatures who believed pain was weakness, now stood speechless before the one who had turned pain into strength. Kareth's voice, when it finally came, was softer than anyone had ever heard it. Human, she said slowly. You shame us. Ryan looked up, confusion flickering in his eyes. Kareth lowered her head slightly. Not a bow, not yet, but something close. We who call ourselves the strongest have forgotten what true strength looks like. We see power in perfection. But you, she paused, her tone trembling faintly. You carry strength in every wound. Ryan didn't reply. He didn't need to. His silence said more than words ever could. One of the younger Valkar warriors, a female with silver armor, took a hesitant step forward. She looked at Ryan's scars, then down at her shining armor. Her claws curled slightly, shame washing over her expression. How? Do you keep fighting? She asked quietly. After losing so much? Ryan turned to her, his expression calm but kind. Because someone always needs you to, he said simply. When the world falls apart, you don't fight for yourself. You fight for the ones who can't anymore. Those words sank into her heart like a blade of light. She bowed her head slowly. Kareth watched this exchange in silence. Her mind was spinning. Everything she had been taught, the idea that strength meant glory, that scars were flaws, that beauty was proof of victory. All of it seemed so small now. She took another step forward, close enough now that she could see every line on his face. Tell me, she said, her voice almost a whisper, what keeps your kind alive? What gives you this fire? Ryan's answer was simple, but it struck through the room like thunder. Hope, he said, even when it hurts. For a long time no one spoke. The word hung in the air, glowing with something almost sacred. Hope. It was something the Valkar had forgotten long ago. To them, war was honor, death was peace, and victory was everything. But hope? That was something fragile, something they believed only the weak needed. And yet, standing before this human, they finally saw what hope could do. It could keep a broken man standing when the universe itself wanted him gone. Kareth closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them again, her expression had changed completely. There was no pride left, no superiority, only quiet respect. You have taught us something today, Ryan Hale, she said softly, something our kind has forgotten. Ryan shook his head gently. I didn't come here to teach. I came here to prove that we're not as weak as you think. A faint smile touched Kareth's lips. You did far more than that. Behind her, one of the older Valkar commanders slowly went down on one knee. Then another followed, then another. The sound of armored knees hitting the marble floor echoed through the hall like thunder. Ryan's eyes widened slightly. What are you doing? Kareth bowed her head. We kneel not to your kind, she said, but to what you represent, to the strength that comes not from power but from pain endured. Ryan stood frozen. He wasn't used to gestures like this. On Earth, no one had ever bowed to him. Most of his medals lay forgotten in dusty boxes. He fought because he had to, not for honor, not for praise. And now, here he was, standing before an entire empire of warriors, all on their knees before him. For the first time in a long while, Ryan felt something stir in his chest. A warmth, fragile but real. Maybe this was what his fallen friends had fought for. Maybe this was what hope looked like. He looked down at Kareth, his voice soft. "You don't have to bow," he said. "Just remember what you saw today." Kareth lifted her head, meeting his eyes. "We will," she said firmly. "Every one of us." And in that moment, the silence of the proud became the silence of respect. That night, long after the Valkar warriors had left the grand hall in silence, Ryan sat alone in his quarters. The faint blue light of the alien moon spilled through the window, washing over his scarred skin. He sat on the edge of the bed, a metal plate from his broken armor resting beside him. His hands trembled slightly as he ran a finger across the dents and scratches. Each one told a story. Each one held a memory that refused to fade. He thought he had buried those memories long ago. But standing in that hall, surrounded by warriors who couldn't understand what loss meant, something inside him had cracked open again. Mars. The name itself was enough to send a cold ache through his chest. He closed his eyes, and in an instant he was there again, the red wasteland stretching endlessly under a blood-colored sky. The air had tasted of iron and dust. The ground trembled with every distant explosion. The sun burned like fire and the wind howled like a living thing. They had called it Operation Dawnstrike, a mission meant to reclaim the last human colony from the swarm, a race of insectoid creatures that devoured everything in their path. The human army had been small, barely 1,000 soldiers. Ryan was their commander. He remembered every face, every name, every last scream. They were supposed to hold the line for 12 hours until reinforcements arrived. But the reinforcements never came. For 3 days they fought without rest. The swarm came in waves, thousands of them, their bodies clicking and shrieking as they tore through steel and flesh alike. Ryan's armor, the same one the Valkyr had mocked, had saved his life again and again. But every blow left a mark. Every impact left pain behind. He could still see Corporal Haynes, barely 20 years old, laughing through the blood on his face as he fired his last rounds. He could still hear Sergeant Imani shouting orders even as the acid burned through her side. He could still smell the smoke, thick with the scent of fire and death. They had all believed he would get them out alive. He had promised them that. But when the sun set on the 3rd day, only Ryan was still standing. He had crawled out from the ruins of their base, half-blind, half-deaf, his armor broken and melting against his skin. His left arm had been torn open by shrapnel. His chest had been pierced by a spike that missed his heart by an inch. But he kept crawling. He couldn't stop. He couldn't die yet. Not while their voices still echoed in his head. He remembered the moment he reached the ridge overlooking the battlefield. The red sand below was littered with human bodies. His soldiers. His family. The people who had trusted him, and he had failed them all. Ryan opened his eyes. The quiet of his room felt heavier now, pressing against his chest. He reached for the plate of his armor again, gripping it tightly. It still bore the mark of that battle, acid burns, shattered edges, and the faint traces of human blood trapped beneath the surface. He whispered to the empty room, "You all deserve better than me," his voice cracked. He had never said those words out loud before. The door to his quarters slid open softly. Commander Kareth stepped inside. She was not in her ceremonial armor this time. Her silver fur shimmered faintly in the moonlight, and her eyes, normally fierce, were filled with something quiet and curious. "I thought you might be awake," she said softly. Ryan didn't look at her. "Didn't think you'd visit a weak human twice." Kareth tilted her head slightly, her crest twitching. "You are many things, Ryan Hale. Weak is not one of them." He gave a small, bitter laugh. "You don't know me." "I want to," she said simply. That made him turn. He studied her face for a moment. There was no mockery, no pride. Just sincerity. It felt strange. Alien, even more than she was. Kareth's gaze fell to the piece of armor beside him. "That plate," she said softly. "The one you carried into the hall. It's from your homeworld, isn't it?" Ryan nodded slowly. "Mars, the last place I ever called home." Kareth hesitated, then took a step closer. "Tell me what happened there." For a long time he said nothing. But her tone, gentle, almost reverent, broke something loose inside him. The words came out before he could stop them. "We were sent to save a colony," he began quietly. "But it wasn't just soldiers there. There were families, children. The swarm hit faster than anyone expected. We were outnumbered, outgunned, and cut off from command. Kareth listened in silence. I told them we'd make it through, he continued, his voice cracking. I told them to hold the line. I told them to trust me. His fingers tightened on the armor until his knuckles went white. And they did. Every single one of them believed me. Even when they were dying, they kept fighting because they thought I could save them. He stopped, breathing hard. The images were too clear, too real. The sound of screaming, the feel of blood on his hands, but I couldn't, he whispered. The reinforcements never came. They died for nothing. Kareth knelt in front of him slowly. Her large clawed hands rested on her knees as she looked up at him. Not for nothing, she said quietly. Ryan looked at her sharply. You weren't there. No, she admitted. But I know what it means to lead. And I know what it means to lose. You did not fail because they died. You led because they lived long enough to hope. He stared at her, unable to speak. Kareth's eyes softened. You carry their scars as your own. That is not weakness. That is love. Ryan blinked, surprised. He hadn't expected a warrior like her to use that word. Love? He repeated softly. She nodded. The way you speak of them, the way you still remember their faces, that is love, human. We Valkar, we forgot that long ago. To us, warriors are tools. But to you, they are family. For the first time that night, Ryan's shoulders relaxed a little. A tear slipped down his cheek before he could stop it. They were, he whispered, and I left them behind. Kareth reached out slowly and placed her clawed hand over his. Her touch was gentle, careful. You didn't leave them, she said. You carried them here. Every step, every scar, they lived through you. Her words cut through the silence like light through smoke. Ryan didn't answer right away. He just sat there staring at her hand over his. It was strange. Her skin was rough and cold, but somehow it felt comforting. For the first time in years, the weight on his chest felt lighter. He looked up, meeting her gaze. You sound like someone who's lost people too. Kareth's expression darkened slightly. I have, she admitted. My brother fell in the War of Sons. I was not there to save him. I wear gold to hide the shame. Ryan gave a faint smile. Then I guess we're both wearing armor for the same reason. She smiled too, just a little. And for a moment the silence between them wasn't heavy. It was peaceful. Two warriors from different worlds bound by the same grief. After a while, Ryan stood up and picked up his broken armor plate. Maybe it's time I stop running from ghosts, he said softly. Kareth rose too. And maybe it's time I learn what it truly means to fight for something more than glory. Their eyes met again, and in that shared look, a fragile understanding was born. Outside, the moons of Valkar drifted across the sky, their light falling softly through the window. For the first time in a long while, Ryan Hale felt the smallest spark of peace. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, whether another battle, another loss, another wound, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't alone anymore. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The sun of Valkar rose like molten gold over the horizon, its light spilling across the fortress walls. The air hummed with tension. War drums echoed in the distance, their rhythm heavy and steady, like a heartbeat before battle. Ryan stood in the courtyard, the morning wind brushing against his face. Around him, hundreds of Valkar warriors moved in formation, towering figures clad in shimmering armor, their weapons gleaming like fire. But today, their proud steps carried a new kind of energy, something quieter and stronger. They had seen the human scars. They had heard his words, and though none of them would say it out loud, their hearts had changed. Kareth walked toward him, her armor gleaming silver and blue. She looked different now, still fierce but calmer, more grounded. Her gaze softened when it fell on Ryan. The front lines are ready, she said. The Zethar fleet will strike by dusk. Ryan nodded. How bad? Bad enough, she said grimly. They outnumber us 3-1. Ryan smiled faintly. Then it'll be fair. Kareth tilted her head, her crest twitching in amusement. You really are strange, human. Been told that before, he replied, adjusting the new armor they had crafted for him. It was a blend of Valkar metal and human design, sleek, flexible, and unpolished. It wasn't beautiful, but it was real, and that's what mattered to him. As he fastened the last piece, Kareth stepped closer. You don't have to fight with us, she said quietly. You've already proven your strength. Ryan looked at her with a small, tired smile. Strength isn't something you prove once, he said. It's something you keep showing every time life tries to break you. She said nothing, but the look in her eyes told him she understood. When the call to arms sounded, the army assembled before the great gates of the fortress. The ground trembled beneath their feet. Above them, the sky was already darkening with the shadow of approaching warships. Ryan walked to the front beside Kareth. The soldiers fell silent as they saw him. This small, scarred being who had once been mocked now stood among their leaders. Kareth raised her spear high. "Warriors of Valkar!" she shouted, her voice ringing across the plain. "The enemy comes to take what is ours. They believe strength is in numbers, in firepower, in fear, but they have not seen us and they have not seen him." She turned to Ryan and gestured for him to speak. Ryan took a deep breath and stepped forward. Hundreds of alien eyes watched him. He wasn't used to speeches, but his heart knew what to say. "You all know what fear feels like," he began, his voice calm but powerful. "The cold in your chest, the shaking in your hands, the thought that maybe you won't make it out alive." A murmur rippled through the ranks. "I know that fear," Ryan continued. "I've lived with it. I've buried friends because of it. But fear isn't your enemy, it's proof you're still alive. It's proof you still care about what happens next." He looked across the faces before him, some proud, some uncertain, all listening. "You think strength comes from armor and weapons. But real strength is getting back up after everything has been taken from you. It's standing when you should have fallen. It's fighting when your heart says you can't anymore." Silence followed. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Then Kareth slammed the base of her spear into the ground. "To battle!" she roared. The gates thundered open. The army surged forward like a tide of metal and fire. The plains erupted into chaos, the sound of blasters, the clash of steel, the roar of engines. The Zethar swarm descended from the sky, their dark ships spitting bolts of plasma that scorched the earth. The Valkar met them head-on, their voices rising in a fierce battle cry, and Ryan was in the middle of it. He moved like a storm. His armor cracked, sparks flew, blood splattered, but he never stopped. He fought with a strange, relentless rhythm, like every strike was powered by memory. The Valkar had strength and speed, but Ryan had something they didn't: endurance. That quiet, stubborn fire that refused to die. At one point, a massive Zethar brute charged him, slamming him into the ground. The world blurred for a second. Pain shot through his chest and blood filled his mouth. He could have stayed down. He could have closed his eyes and let it end. But then, in the dust and noise, he saw flashes of memory. Haynes laughing, Imani shouting orders, his fallen soldiers standing behind him like ghosts. "Get up, sir," their voices whispered. "We're not done yet," Ryan roared, grabbing his broken weapon and driving it into the brute's chest. The alien screamed and collapsed. Ryan stood again, swaying, bleeding, but standing. Kareth saw it from across the battlefield. Her chest tightened. "By the suns," she whispered. "He's still fighting." The sight of the human refusing to fall lit a fire in every Valkar heart. Warriors who had been wavering now roared with new fury. They pushed forward, shouting his name, "Ryan, Ryan," until the very sky seemed to tremble with it. Ryan barely heard them. His world had shrunk to the rhythm of his heart, the swing of his blade, the rush of air in his lungs. He was back on Mars, back in that hopeless fight, but this time he wasn't alone. Kareth joined him at the front lines, cutting through enemies with blinding precision. "You fight like a madman," she shouted over the noise. Ryan grinned through the blood on his face. "You're welcome." Hours passed. The battlefield turned into smoke and ruin. The Valkar banners still stood, tattered but proud. One by one, the Zethar ships fell from the sky, crashing into the earth in balls of fire. When the last enemy was gone, the field went quiet. Kareth looked around, breathing hard. The ground was scorched, the air thick with smoke. Then she saw him, Ryan, kneeling in the dirt, his armor cracked and smoking, his hands trembling. She ran to him, kneeling beside him. "Ryan, are you—" He looked up, smiling weakly. "Still alive," he whispered. "Sorry to disappoint." She let out a small, breathless laugh. "You fool. You could have died. Would have been worth it," he said. "If it meant you all lived." Kareth didn't answer. She just stared at him, this fragile human who had burned brighter than anyone else on the field. Then, without thinking, she placed her forehead against his, a Valkar gesture of deep respect. "The fire that keeps you alive," she said softly. I can see it now. It's not made of strength. It's made of heart. Ryan's eyes softened. Same thing, isn't it? She smiled faintly. Maybe for humans. The wind carried the scent of smoke and ash across the battlefield, but beneath it was something else. Hope. When they returned to the fortress, the Valkar soldiers lined the gates in silence. As Ryan passed one by one, they raised their weapons in salute, not as a gesture of command, but of honor. Ryan looked around, confused. What's happening? Kareth's voice was steady but warm. They salute the one who reminded us what it means to fight, not for glory but for life. Ryan didn't know what to say. He just nodded quietly, the faintest smile tugging at his lips. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like a survivor. He felt like a soldier again. But deep down, he knew the story wasn't over. The war was far from done, and somewhere out there, the shadows of the past still waited, still. For this moment, just this moment, Ryan Hale allowed himself to breathe. He looked up at the stars above Valkar and whispered to the ghosts of Mars. We did it, guys. We made it count this time. And in that quiet victory under alien skies, the human who had been called weak finally became a legend. The days after the battle were quiet, too quiet. The smell of smoke still lingered in the air, but the sounds of war were gone. The Valkar fortress stood tall once more, though its walls bore the marks of fire and blood. Inside, soldiers moved slowly, tending to the wounded, repairing armor, and whispering stories of what they had seen, the human who refused to fall. Ryan Hale. His name had spread through the ranks like wildfire. The alien warriors who once mocked him now spoke of him with reverence. Some called him the Ironless One, others the Unbroken. But to Kareth he was something else, something far greater. He was hope. Ryan sat in the healing chamber, his body wrapped in bandages. His face was pale, but his eyes were still sharp. A Valkar medic worked silently, sealing the wounds that refused to close. His armor lay nearby, shattered again, just like before. But this time he didn't care. Kareth entered the chamber quietly. She looked exhausted but proud. You should be resting, she said. Ryan smiled faintly. I am resting. This is just how humans rest, sitting up. Thinking too much. She chuckled, the sound low and musical. Thinking of what? He looked at his hands. What comes next? Kareth's smile faded. You've done enough, Ryan. You don't need to fight anymore. He met her eyes, and there was something sad in his expression. That's the thing about humans, he said softly. We never think it's enough. There's always one more fight left. Before she could respond, the fortress alarm rang through the halls, a deep, thunderous sound that made the ground tremble. Kareth turned sharply. No, not again. Ryan struggled to his feet. What is it? The Zethar flagship, she said grimly. Their queen has come herself. They want revenge. The room shook as distant explosions echoed across the plains. Ryan's pulse quickened. The war wasn't over. Not yet. Kareth grabbed her spear. You're too injured to fight. Ryan shook his head. If she's here, then this is the end. One way or another. He looked at her, his gaze steady. And if this is the end, I'm not sitting it out. Kareth wanted to argue, but when she looked into his eyes, she saw the same fire she'd seen on the battlefield, the same unbreakable will. She sighed and nodded once. Then we finish this together. The fortress gates opened again, and the two of them led the charge. The Valkar army, still weary from the last battle, rallied behind them. The ground quaked as the Zethar queen descended from her ship, a towering creature of black chitin and glowing red eyes. Her voice was like thunder. Pathetic creatures, she hissed. You think you can defy the swarm? Kareth raised her spear. We don't think, she shouted. We know. The battle began once more, fierce and terrible. The Zethar poured from their ships like a black tide, filling the sky with fire. The Valkar fought bravely, their roars echoing across the plains. But the enemy was endless. Ryan and Kareth fought side by side, their movements in perfect rhythm. Every time Kareth struck, Ryan followed. Every time Ryan stumbled, Kareth caught him. They were two warriors from different worlds, bound by the same will to survive. But the queen was unlike anything they had faced. Her claws could cut through steel, her voice could shatter stone. She struck down warriors with a single sweep, laughing as she advanced. Ryan saw her raise her blade toward Kareth and didn't think. He moved. He threw himself between them. The blade pierced through his side. Kareth screamed, her voice breaking through the chaos. "Ryan!" He fell to one knee, blood spilling onto the ground. Pain exploded through his body, but he didn't let go of his weapon. He looked up at the monstrous queen, eyes burning. "You think you can scare us?" he said through clenched teeth. "You think pain means victory?" The queen snarled. "You are dying, human. You are nothing." Ryan's grip tightened on his weapon. "Maybe, but I'm human, and humans don't stop." With a roar that shook the air, he drove his broken blade upward straight into the queen's chest. Energy flared, light burst across the field, and the Zethar screamed. The queen staggered back, thrashing before collapsing in a burst of fire and dust. When the light faded, the battlefield was silent. The Zethar swarm froze. Their queen was gone. One by one they turned and fled into the sky, their ships retreating into the darkness. Kareth rushed to Ryan's side, dropping her weapon as she fell beside him. He was lying in the dirt, breathing shallowly, his eyes half open. "Ryan," she whispered, her hands trembling as she held his face. "Stay with me, please." He smiled weakly. "Told you. Humans don't stop easy." Tears welled in her golden eyes. "You fool. You saved us again." He tried to laugh, but it came out as a weak cough. "Guess I finally did something right." Kareth shook her head fiercely. "No, you've done more than right. You've changed us. All of us." The Valkar soldiers gathered around them in silence. For the first time in their history, they saw a warrior die not for glory, not for honor, but for others. Ryan's eyes fluttered as he looked at her. "Promise me something," he whispered. "Anything. Don't forget what you saw." "Don't let them forget either." Kareth nodded quickly, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I promise." He smiled again, soft, peaceful. "Good, then maybe." Mars wasn't the last place I made a difference, and with that his eyes closed. The wind stilled. The battlefield went quiet. Even the sun seemed to dim for a moment. Kareth lowered her head, pressing her forehead against his one last time. "Rest, human," she whispered. "Your fire will never fade." Days later, when the smoke cleared and the dead were buried, the Valkar Empire built a monument in the heart of their capital. It wasn't tall or golden like their usual statues. It was simple, stone and steel shaped like a cracked piece of human armor. At its base, words were carved in 2 languages. "Here lies Ryan Hale, the human who fought without armor. He showed us that strength is not in metal or might, but in the heart that refuses to give up." Kareth stood before the monument every morning. She no longer wore her polished armor. Instead, she bore her scars openly, just as he had, and when young Valkar warriors asked her why she fought that way, she would smile softly and say, "Because a human taught me what it means to be strong." And somewhere, beyond the stars, maybe Ryan Hale smiled too, for though his body had fallen, his spirit lived on. In every warrior who rose again, in every heart that dared to hope, and in every scar that refused to fade, because some fires never die.